Okay. Okay. So this is a second lecture on informal transfers and risk sharing. And I'm going to start with essentially the same motivation as Adam, developed yesterday, presenting maybe different sets of facts and, different views of the same motivation. And then I will bring the discussion into a different direction from what Adam did. There will be many connections, and I'll try to draw the parallels, but so the first remark is that informal transfers are still very much prevalent, even in developed economies, okay? So it's not something of the past. What do I call informal transfers? Here is a possible definition. Any transfer in cash, in kind, or in time between individuals and households which are not market transactions. Here are a few stylized facts that I'm going to document in the next few slides. First, they're quantitatively large. We're not talking about, a minor phenomenon. Second, they tend to interact with the business cycle and with public transfers. Third, they flow through social networks. And fourth, they play an important roles of, so at least two important roles, redistribution and insurance. So a few numbers first. So in developing countries, with the lack of formal markets and formal programs, informal transfers, are very much a first order kind of effect. So it's hard to find, hard numbers on all the informal transfers going on in an economy for obvious reasons. But there is one kind of informal transfers on which we have pretty good numbers, which are remittances, right? So the money that migrants send back home. And here are a few numbers on remittances. So it turns out that, Israel's neighbors are among the highest remittance receivers in the world in terms of percentage of GDP. So in Lebanon, remittances correspond to 20% of GDP, It's probably larger than any industry in Lebanon. Jordan, 16%, Philippines, 12%. These are, high numbers. Overall, it's greater than financial aid. And it's more or less on par with foreign direct investment, so investment by firms in developing countries. Also, it has been remarkably stable following the crisis. So between 2008 and 2009, they dropped by 5% overall, while FDI dropped by 40%. Okay. It turns out that these informal transfers are also important in developed economies, so it's even harder to find numbers, and the numbers I'm citing here are not, should be taken with a grain of salt, but in France, I found in an article in Le Monde, I never could trace out, the original study, but that family transfers, financial transfers, increased from 2 to 4% of GDP, okay, in France, in recent years. In the US, the number you can find coming from something called the National Transfer Account Project. Inter-household transfers are estimated at 1.2% of GDP. This represents more than $100 billion US dollars. This includes gifts to charity, does not include bequests. So. Now, second fact is that these transfers interact with public transfers. And here, there are some important concerns in the literature and a relatively large empirical literature on the topic on something called crowding out, which is this worry that if you increase public transfers, this may lead to a decrease in private transfers, and hence, this may decrease the impact of the original public intervention. So, for instance, in a study by Donald Cox, who has been working on this for a while, in the Philippines, they find that, between they find a crowding out rate of between 30 and 80%. Okay. So the corresponding decrease in private transfers from an increase in public transfers for the poorest households. And here is, one conclusion of this article. Attempts to aid the poor could be thwarted by private responses, which leak benefits to richer households in the form of lighter burdens of support for less fortunate kids. And this is related to some papers that Adam was discussing yesterday. There is some recent evidence that indeed, transfers to the poor indirectly benefit socially connected households who do not receive these transfers. Okay, so it's not at the right place, but... now, the third fact is that these informal transfers flow through social networks. Okay? There is an expanding empirical literature in development economics, mostly, starting to get some detailed data on who gives to whom, and how much and in which circumstances. Marcel Fachon has been working on this. Joachim de Wert did his PhD dissertation, was one of the first ones to document this in a systematic manner. And one of the main messages of this empirical literature is that even in small rural villages, it's not true that everyone helps everyone else. It doesn't work this way. It's very structured. It's structured through family networks, neighboring relationships. Okay. So social structure matters a lot, even in this, tight, small communities. And here is, so from the original study by De Wert in a rural village in Tanzania, he asked in his PhD dissertation, so can you give a list of people from inside or outside the village who you can personally rely on for help, and others that can rely on you for help in cash, kind, or labor? Okay. So here is a picture I got. May not be the best, visualization software out there. So from the picture, it seems like everyone is connected to everyone else, but not at all. Okay? The average degree here is about 10 for more than 100 households. So density is about 0.1. So you only get, 10% of the links. Okay. Yeah.
Do you know if it was that directed or not? Because the question is kind of...
The question is undirected.
Okay.
So of course, in this, because you ask the question to the two households, the reciprocation rates are never 100%. But I'm pretty sure in the picture it just, undirected it. Yeah.
But you could imagine people getting things indirectly through. That is, I might go to you for a loan. You don't have a loan, but then you go to one of your contacts.
Indeed.
So that you can give me the loan.
Exactly. And what you're talking about, that we could call intermediation in gifts, okay? It's very much at the heart of the network models I'm going to present later, okay? It's kind of a key question. So let me get back to this.
May I ask
Sure.
about reciprocation?
Yeah.
It must be very important. Can you reciprocation maybe next 5 years, sometimes, not immediate?
Sure. Definitely. The dynamic dimension matters, of course, here as well. So, the graph is very connected. I don't remember. It's a small diameter. I would say no more than 3, 4. Okay. But okay. Now, these informal transfers play two important roles that are related but distinct. And somehow the literature has not really made this distinction clear enough in my view. But one is insurance, of course. Okay. So as a first approximation, you could view insurance as, reducing the variance in consumption. Okay. When you get help when you have a negative shock, you give help when, your friend has a negative shock, just smooth, consumption. But then there is also redistribution going on in these transfers, like in the remittances, or from parents to children. And again, as a first approximation, you could view redistribution as being changes in average consumption level. So transfers, mostly flowing in one direction. Okay? Well, there could be some back and forth, but on average, going more into one direction. Now, an important question, of course, is why do people give, these transfers to each other? There are three broad types of explanations that have been put forward, and there are a few others that are related. The first one is exchange. Okay, so in particular, we may want to enter into a mutually beneficial informal insurance contract. I'm helping you today because I expect you to help me tomorrow, and we both do this because we both gain in expectation. Okay. So this is kind of mimicking a market transaction, but in the absence of a formal market. And economists have been working a lot on the exchange motive, in particular in theory. The second one is altruism. So if you have kids, you know that altruism is an important fact of life. So people could give to others they just care about, in their utility. They care about. They are not doing it because they're expecting to receive something in return. Yeah. And finally, and there is more and more work on this, social pressure and social norms are important, phenomena. So people could give because they feel they're obliged to give. Okay. Now, identifying, which motive is at work, as you can guess, is not easy. There is a large literature on this, and it's still growing. And now we're doing experiments and, to try to tease out. My current view of the literature is that there is some evidence that all of these three motives are at work. Okay. So at the end of the day, we probably want to develop a model with, altruism, exchange, and pressure. Well, we're not there yet. There are very few, by the way, there are very few papers trying to mix two of these motives. Very few. Yeah. So maybe, maybe in the close family, it's more altruism and maybe more pressure in the extended family and more exchange with, neighbors. Could be this kind of thing going on. We don't really know at this stage. So just to give an example of the kind of studies, the kind of indirect evidence that is found. Yeah.
There has been work on one form of motivation trying to, in effect, crowding out another. So altruism might be crowded out by an exchange motive.
Yes, indeed. This is another important topic, right? Yeah. So and in particular, formal. So exchange is informal, but it's close to formal market because it's. So in particular, there is work on how formal institutions. Adam was, alluding to this yesterday, can crowd out informal institutions. This is a very important, topic.
Have you ever looked at all the literature on giving you the medical context? Blood.
Yeah.
Was the standard example.
Right.
That's
Yes.
exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Yes.
But part now might increase your body organs, kidney exchanges.
Yes. Indeed. So.
A market can actually reduce people's altruistic motive for donating.
Yes. I fully agree. Yeah, this is an important topic, and as Adam was saying, there is more work needed on, the interactions between formal and informal institutions, where there is very little work, on.
You sometimes can tell empirically because it takes, when you go to the details, they may take different forms. For example, in the blood case, there was a period when American blood was both, it's now largely donation, but there was a point where about 50% was bought. You could go to the place and sell your blood. And one of the problems was quality control. Supposing you had some disease, hepatitis, or later AIDS, which is much more serious. Well, if you're selling it, you tend to conceal that. If you're altruistic, of course, you would worry about it.
Yeah.
And so you can tell by the behavior something more about the motives really.
Yes.
And there's always statistically unbacked.
Yes. Yeah. It's an important issue. So, for instance, in a recent study on health problems and informal insurance in Tanzania, Joachim De Wert and Marcel Fachan find that chronically disabled individuals, so individuals who get some very serious health problems that that limit their ability to work or they are net transfer recipients primarily from kin. Okay. So, it's indirect evidence, but, it's suggestive of altruism or social norm going on. Doesn't seem that you can explain this with an exchange, with some kind of informal contract. Okay. Sorry?
With social pressure.
Yeah, sure. It could be social pressure. Okay. So, now, an important literature that has been giving some, indirect evidence for the importance of informal risk sharing is a literature that follows Townsend, that had in the famous 94 paper that Adam was mentioning yesterday as well. And I'm going to talk a bit more about this model and this paper in this talk. So essentially, Townsend tested the assumption of efficient insurance on consumption data. Okay. And there is a large literature that has, redone this test many times on many data sets, and it's still going on. I mean, it's still an active literature. Typically, it's rejected at the village level, okay? But it's not rejected by much. And typically, it does not seem too inefficient. So consumption varies little with individual shocks. So you get significant coefficients, but small. When you regress consumption variations on individual shocks, controlling for village level shocks. So it's often interpreted as a sign that, somehow informal risk sharing works quite well. Maybe not as well as it could. Of course, it's in parallel to or in tandem with self-insurance, and most papers on networks and risk sharing tends to forget this at this stage. But and I don't know what the empirical literature has to say about the respective, I'm not sure, we know the respective roles of self-insurance versus insurance from others. I think it's an important topic. So in any case, in a recent paper, Mazoko and a co-author in the ER, they develop, the latest version of this test that can account for preference heterogeneity. And they have these very interesting findings that on data on rural India, with their new test, they do reject efficient risk sharing at the village level, However, they do not reject it at the caste level within the village. Okay? So maybe it's a question of finding the right group. Okay. So what is the outline for the rest of the talk?
I'm puzzled by that. If each caste within a village has efficient risk sharing,
Right.
then what additional risk sharing would you have to have at
Be-
the village level?
Between castes, right? So they are able.
So you're assuming that there might be caste-specific shocks.
Yes, if you want, or there will remain the caste level aggregate shock.
Also, if the numbers are not very big, then the nature of mutual insurance is different if you have 10
Well,
people.
Yeah, it might be
Big
limited. It might be, if there are small.
Just by the size. I know what we're talking about.
Yeah, these are small villages, right? So
I believe it's also true that if you look at public transfers, where there are different races, even in the United States, you find less transfer. But even when you're doing it through the public sector by voting, nevertheless, it's still an expression of altruism.
Right.
And that you find that where there are bigger racial differences, or
Okay.
bigger proportions of one elite, you
Okay.
have less willingness to give.
okay, interesting. So I'm going to present briefly, this benchmark model of efficient insurance on which the Townsend approach is based. So many of you may be familiar with it, but then I'm going to talk on how to incorporate networks into this, approach. And then I'm going to present two recent models of informal transfers in networks with frictions. The first one, and I'm only going to talk briefly about it, is a model developed by Adam, which was in a second paper. So it was a bit different from the paper I presented yesterday, but related. And then I'm going to talk about a model of altruism in networks I've been working on for the better part of the past 4 years. then I'm going to talk a bit about, identification between the motifs, and conclude with a discussion of some other very recent models of friction that have been proposed, issue of endogenous networks, and, some natural next step for where the literature should go. So here is a benchmark model. Consider a community of agents. Income is stochastic, and in state of the world S, agent I receives some income Y0 IS, and consumption and income differ. The agent consumes YIS. So here we are assuming some kind of scheme that redistributes resources ex post. Incomes are realized, there is some redistribution going on, and at this stage, I'm leaving, how the redistribution works unspecified. Could be a social planner, some leader, village leader. That so essentially what this means is that, the sum of the consumption levels is equal to the sum of the income in any state of the world. So we want to understand what are the Pareto optima in this system, the best possible, arrangements. And this Pareto optima will solve, this following planner's optimization problem, which is, the sum of some Pareto weight times expected utility of consumption under, consumption levels subject to this, redistribution equality. So these Pareto optima are the states that exploit, as usual, all the gains from trade. Although trade here are traits like if in some state I give some money to J, this is in exchange for the fact that in another state J gives some money to I. Okay? This is the kind of trade we're talking about. So for instance, under constant absolute risk aversion utilities, when you, sorry? So lambda is a Pareto weight. It's greater than or equal to 0. At least one of them is non-zero. So they could be, anything. And the different, if you do this with all the lambdas, it describes the Pareto frontier. Okay. So with Cara utility functions, and with the same coefficient of risk aversion, you solve this problem. It's a simple, single decision maker optimization problem. And you get this rule that every agent must receive the average income in the state of the world, plus some, plus or minus some level which is independent of the state of the world. Okay. So it's a very simple sharing rule. If the utilities are the same and the Pareto weights are the same, so we're in the utilitarian framework, everyone should receive, the same thing. So it's equal income sharing. And more generally, economists have understood well. So more generally, consumption, is a function of aggregate income, or if you want, average income. Economists have understood this, function well. And this provides the foundation for the econometric test of perfect insurance. Okay. Yes.
So suppose that the different individuals have different expected income. So I think in this setting, then it's not only insurance, but also reduction of the inequality. Right. So how do we interpret or separate like insurance from the inequality reduction?
Right. So the question is that individuals may have different, income distributions more generally, right? And then what's going on in this Pareto optima is not only insurance, right? And there may be some redistribution or reduction of inequality. I totally agree with you. Yeah, but so for each, indeed, for each, set of Pareto weights, you will have, at the end of the day, a potentially different expected consumption level. So I don't know if this has been studied. That's a good question, Researchers typically focus on insurance, and I was telling a bit earlier, I think redistribution matters as well in this system. And you could get some redistribution here. For instance, if someone is risk averse, you know, he may be willing to pay on average to be insured. So even in a Pareto optimum, even with individual, you know, rationality constraints, you could get some redistribution in expectation.
You can think of redistribution as insurance at an earlier state. That is, think of our income distributions as being determined at random, and then redistribution is just an attempt to correct for that original random distribution.
Yes, that's true, but it would still be different. So this ex ante kind of, you know, under the veil of ignorance kind of insurance would still be different from this, you know, interim level. So, so maybe there are some theoretical things to study here. Okay. Now this benchmark essentially assumed no constraint about the way redistribution works. And so instead, you know, the view that we have been taking in the network community on this is that assumes that some, you know, predetermined network exists, and transfers can only flow through these, you know, pre-existing links, okay, which would be consistent with this empirical literature showing that transfers are structured through networks. So now I want to make the bilateral transfers explicit. So Tij is, you know, the bilateral transfers that I give to J in state S, so it's, you know, conditional on the state of the world. And now, you know, consumption is income minus all the transfers I make plus all the transfers I receive. Okay. So what this means essentially is that there exists some, you know, pre-existing network G, and we impose that Tij is 0 if Gij is 0. If you want it, it's a constraint on the possible transfer profiles. So here is the first question: how much, you know, insurance can we get? So in other words, what happens when we solve, you know, this problem of, you know, maximizing the welfare function under this constraint?
It's understood then you put an extra subscript S.
Yes, so it should, for simplicity, I removed it, but there should be S, you know. It's conditional on the state of the world. So I don't know if it's, so maybe this result is maybe not surprising, but it's a useful benchmark. So essentially, the community can reach efficient insurance within components of G. Okay? So essentially, conditional on being in a component, the constraint is not binding, if you want. It's not reducing welfare. Of course, if the network is disconnected, as might be the case in the Masoko application, right? If subcasts within a village do not, you know, transfer to each other, then you're in trouble in the sense that overall it might be inefficient. But within a component, it's still efficient. Okay? So in other words, but we'll get lots of intermediation, right? Depending on the network. So this is a theoretical result. One problem with this result, before getting to this problem, one issue here is that here we're solving, you know, a constrained social planner problem, but networks, you know, are related to the idea that things are very much decentralized and happening at the local level. So one question you might ask is, you know, how can we decentralize this? How can we get from, you know, local bilateral rules to this efficient insurance within components? So it's something I've been working on in a paper with Rachel Cranton, and there is a simple way to do this. It may or may not be realistic, but here is how it works. Suppose that pairs meet at random, okay? And every time they meet, for instance, they share equally their current income. Okay. Then if you repeat this process, you know, long enough, so each period you pick a pair, share their current income, and you repeat it, it will eventually converge with probability 1 to equal sharing within components. Okay? Sometimes convergence is relatively quick, sometimes it can be very slow, depending on the shape of the network, but it does converge. And more generally, you know, Adam and his co-authors showed that any Pareto optimum within components can be decentralized in this way. Is it a good model or not? I don't know. It does show us a potential way to introduce frictions here, right? If you put limits, for instance, time limits on the process.
At every meeting, there's a new realization of the state of nature.
No, that's the thing. So it's within
Within the state of nature.
within a state of nature. So like, take harvest, right? Harvest happens once a year, right? And then, within a year, we meet a lot with our, friends and relatives, right? So the harvest shock, okay? So of course, if the, again, this could lead, this hasn't been explored much, but, we could play around with, the different time scales. And so in any case, this is one way to decentralize. Yeah.
So you say that the convergence depends on the shape of the network. Is there a general...
There is no result on this. If you want to work on this, I think it's an interesting topic. Because it will very much depend on the shape. Okay, very much.
But all that really matters is the component. All that really matters about the network in the limit is
a component.
the components.
Is a component.
Exactly.
Okay.
It just delays the matter.
Yeah, because the convergence time will be affected by the shape. We don't have results yet. Okay. And it's possible. I think it might be possible to get some interesting results here.
Then for equal sharing, you must meet with other people more than one time.
Sure. So again, pairs meet at random. Every time one pair is picked at random, among all pairs. Right? The two people meet, they share their current income. Okay? And then it's repeated. Again, I'm not saying it's necessarily realistic. It's one way to get from, local sharing to, if you want global sharing at the component level. And I guess it's a benchmark. So there are now, there are at least two problems with more globally this model of frictionless transfers in networks. Okay, where the only friction is that we need to have a link to be able to transfer, but then there is no more constraint. Right? One is that a shock on one agent can induce transfers from other agents which are very far away in the network. Think of a line, right, where one guy at the extremity receives a negative shock. Then to get to equal sharing, for instance, the guy at the other extremity will have to give money, and the money will have to flow through all the links in the line. Seems a bit problematic, Intermediation is probably going on, but this is kind of an extreme. Second is that it can induce very large transfer flows within links. Think of two communities separated by one bridge, And if you get a community on shock on one community, it will be perfectly insured because with one bridge you have only one component, but all the money has to flow through this one link. Okay. So this may not be very satisfying, and indeed, there are researchers have been developing recently models of transfers in networks with frictions. Okay. And I'm going to talk in more detail about two of these. One is, this paper by Adam and his co-authors, and the other one is a recent working paper. Well, recent. Not so recent in the sense that the first version was a while ago, but.
Are you leaving out moral hazard for the purpose of this lecture, the sort of stuff Adam was talking about?
Essentially, yes. I'm not going to talk about moral hazard. Okay. What's, I guess, interesting, and I only realized it while preparing the lecture, is that essentially the approach proposed by Adam and his co-authors will solve this problem, right? Because with the capacity constraints, by design, you will not have, but not this problem. I mean, you can still have very long chains. Sorry. The reason, suppose you have the line, okay, and this guy gets a shock, and say everyone, and this will be an example, something like this, right? Okay, and suppose you want to reach equal income sharing, which is one of the Pareto optimum. Okay, So to reach equal income sharing here, you have to have transfers like this, right? So, and it turns out that in the model of altruism in network, this problem is more or less under control in the sense that chains will be of bounded length, but this one is not. You can still get very large transfers. So maybe we should think of models that can, address the two issues. Yes?
This kind of decentralized transfers in the network, is it, in a sense, incentive compatible, exposed? Is there any way to enforce? So I guess if I'm the one who ends up getting a high income and I have to share, I have to give it to someone
Right.
with lower
So I
income?
think in Adam's approach, it is incentive compatible. It was related to what he presented yesterday. So this is, an important issue. In what we are doing with altruism, it's not really an issue. Everyone is just maximizing his utility, but if you want altruism, gives you incentive compatibility. You're giving because you want to give, because you care, right? So it's not an issue there. So just a quick slide on, Adam and the paper by Adam and his co-authors. So it's very related to the model that Adam presented yesterday, but the risk-sharing paper is a bit different from the informal loan paper. What is common is that they do assume that links have values, and these values constrain how much transfers flow through the links. So in a way, and in their second paper, they analyze the following problem, right? What is the best we can get in terms of, insurance? So when we want to maximize this, welfare function, under the constraint that transfers flow through links and cannot exceed the limit, the value of the links, okay? So if you want, it's a Pareto constraint approach. And, so it's a very interesting paper. They show that networks that are sufficiently expensive can still generate good levels of insurance. So how much this constraint bind depends on the shape of the network. And more generally, they characterize the properties of this solution. Okay. Two key features I want to emphasize because they will help me differentiate what they do with the model on altruism. In their approach, notice that small shocks are very well insured because with small shocks, generate small transfers, you're below the large shocks, however, are where the problem lies. If the shock is too big, the transfers you would want to make, this constraint will be binding, and so large shocks will not be well insured. Okay. And also, it's essentially a model of exchange, right? Well, we're exploiting all the gains from trades that are possible under some constraint. Now, in our recent work, we adopt a different angle. And rather than looking at exchange, we want to focus on altruism and altruism in networks. Okay? So just, stepping back a bit of discussion of altruism in economics and why do we think altruism matters. A first observation, I don't know if you know this, but something called Hamilton's rule tells us that we should be altruistic towards our kin, and more generally towards people we share genes with, because selection happens at the gene level, right? And some economists like Ted Bergstrom and Jürgen Weibel and his co-authors have been actually working on these kinds of models. So we should be altruistic. There is a relatively large literature in economics on altruism, following the famous Baker 74 paper. However, most of the studies are based either on small groups, typically pairs, so siblings or spouses, or in macro, there is a literature following Barrow on these overlapping generations, disconnected linear dynasties. So one parent, one child, forever, and all these familial dynasties are completely disconnected. Okay? So obviously, these two kinds of structures, are totally unrealistic. Okay? And when you think a little bit about it, so I encourage you to think about your own families, even strong family ties, so, parents and children, siblings, spouses, form complex networks. It's actually a fact that, that is quite important in genetics and genealogy. In economics, I only know one paper that makes this point. I think it's an important point, independently of what we do, with this. But it's a paper by Burnham and Bagwell in the JP 88, which is well cited, but for some reason people have not done more with this observation. I couldn't resist putting this quote here because only in research, in academic papers can you find this kind of sentences. So, for the human species, propagation requires the participation of two traditionally unrelated individuals. Thus, family linkages form complex networks in which individuals may belong to many dynastic groupings. So, Burnham and Bagwell wanted to criticize, the Barrow approach, and by the way, for those of you interested in the history of science, in the working paper version of the paper, they have a model of random graphs, totally fascinating. Before, we were doing networks with, so they were trying to get away from this dynastic family. So they considered situations with always the same number of men and women, and at each period, one man marries one woman at random, and they make two kids, a boy and a girl, and then they study some properties of these random networks. It's interesting. Bon. In any case, in this paper, they only focus on a very specific issue I'm going to talk about, which is neutrality of public policies. And it's not a constructive paper. It's a paper they want to criticize, the Barrow approach. They do not really, explore the consequences of these facts, except to say that, Barrow was probably wrong to assume these dynastic families. So what we want to do in our paper, is be a bit more constructive and actually take, this assumption that, altruistic ties can form networks, take them seriously, and see, where they lead us. We adopt a benchmark model of altruism à la Becker. People have, if you want, social preferences. They care about their own consumption utility and the consumption utility of others with some, arbitrary alpha ij coefficients. So the network we are going to consider here is weighted and directed, right? Alpha ij could be any number between 0 and 1. And typically, you want to think of alpha as a sparse matrix. We don't care about, most people, but, we care maybe a lot about a few, okay? So this is our utility function. Consumption utility is strictly increasing, strictly concave. The altruistic coefficients are lower than 1, otherwise you have existence problems. And also, we impose that at the same income level, my own marginal utility of money is greater than the marginal utility the discounted altruistic marginal utility. What this means is that at the same income level, I don't want to give. If my friend has the same income as I have, I don't want to give him money, which means that in equilibrium, when you have transfers, it's only from a richer to a poorer in terms of consumption levels. Okay? We don't necessarily need this for all the results, but it does simplify life. So here we have two networks. The first network is the altruistic network that collects all these altruistic coefficients. And here it describes the structure of social preferences. And then we have the network of transfers. These are the actions of the agents. It's also a network, right? It's also weighted and directed. And, you know, these transfers, agents transfers, and these UTTs defines a non-cooperative, multi-dimensional game, simply because, you know, I can give to anyone. So my strategy is a vector of action. It's a network game. So essentially in the paper, we study the Nash equilibria of this game. Okay. One remark is that when people care equally about everyone else, so here it's, you know, for every I different from J, and when the utilities are the same, the income levels could differ, of course. It turns out that this is, so if you want, this is a complete graph case with homogeneous utilities. It turns out that this was this case is covered by the analysis in a paper by Professor Haro in 81. The paper is not easy to find. It's not on the web, but it's still well cited.
We're using another network to find
so one way to view our contribution is that we extend this, you know, early analysis to networks rather than groups. One caveat is that everything we have been doing so far are for fixed incomes, you know, taking the state of the world as given. We're currently working on, you know, understanding the implications of altruism in networks when incomes are stochastic. So I'll have a few things to say here, but this is very much work in progress.
One thing, if we want to try to apply this design of relief for the poor or something like that, I guess the question was raised earlier, sometime now I think about it. How do you, the moral hazard question, you're thinking these things as genuinely stochastic. I know that your income is randomly distributed. Nothing, it's not because you're lazy, it's not because you're, just, so you have to recognize.
Yes.
Possibility.
So, right, so right, so there may be a moral hazard issue, right, because here we are taking the income as given, or, you know, the income distribution as given, but under moral hazard, you know, the income distribution may be affected by, you know, ex-ante efforts, and of course there will be an interaction between these, you know, informal insurance schemes and the efforts. So it turns out, I think this is a very important issue. I'd like to work on this in the future.
Debates that we had in the 1990s in the United States under the Clinton administration about transforming support for the working poor. Some people, although it's not been revived, there are many people who feel there's a fundamental error made.
Yes. So it turns out, I wanted to speak about this a bit later in the talk. It turns out that there is a very interesting recent paper in the AER by Ingela Alger and Jürgen Weibel on moral hazard and altruism.
What?
They also have a companion paper in a book. And one thing, I can talk about this here. So of course, in their model, they have two agents. Okay, so there is no network dimension. One very interesting thing they show is about the difference between altruism and pressure. So if you give because you feel you have to give, but you don't really care about the others, under moral hazard, you will just, you know, reduce your effort because, you know, you're going to be taxed. So the impact of this informal transfer scheme is just negative on the effort. Okay. Under altruism, you have a free rider effect. So this might happen, but they show that another effect comes into play. They call this the empathy effect. I think empathy effect.
Oh.
I think you could call this the breadwinner effect. So it's the fact that when you care about the others, you may actually be willing to work harder to be in a better position to help them. So, and for some range of the parameter, you know, it has the opposite impact on effort. So the informal transfer scheme induces more effort. Okay. So I find this very interesting. I think there is much more to do here. So it could be one way to identify, you know, altruism for an indirect way from pressure. Yeah.
I'm just curious, for the stochastic income, so what prevents you to just conditional on the realization to stay faster.
Yes, that's exactly what we want to do. And, you know, what we are currently doing is that we are now assuming that, you know, incomes is stochastic, conditional on the state of the world, you know, transfers work this way. But what are the implications on the consumption smoothing aspect, you know, on the, if you want, risk sharing aspect? So this will generate risk sharing. This will generate inefficient risk sharing. What are the properties, you know, and it generates an inefficient risk sharing which has different properties from, for instance, the kind of inefficient risk sharing that comes out of the social collateral approach. Okay. Yeah.
How do you control for cases that agent I will like to give money to J, but when he gives money to J, J would give it to K?
So this is exactly what's going on in the model, and what do you mean by controlling for it? So this is so essentially one of the main things that is going on in this model is intermediation. Exactly what you described. Okay. So I cares about J, but does not care about K. Okay, or not as much as J cares about K.
But then when you know that agent J will give the money to K,
You're not happy, but you know you live with it because you care about J, and you know money is fungible, and J. So yeah, it's kind of an important issue. Maybe with you know this forward-looking kind of equilibrium notion, the equilibrium could be different.
for negative alpha, then you wouldn't want to give another agent money in order to give it to your
Yeah, but you still care for J, right? So you still want J situation to improve. So
J will not stay with the money.
it will keep some of this money for him, right? So there is leakage, but you know there is leakage. So I think it's a potentially important issue, and there is some anecdotal evidence on remittances that senders, you know, would be happy to have more control over the way the money they sent is spent, and I think it's related to this. But you know, it's not easy to have control. Money is fungible, and you know, they do send the money, and if their parents, you know, give it to their cousins, they're not happy, but you know, they live with it.
The way you've set it up, I cares only about J's consumption utility.
Right.
But that might mean that I will refrain from giving J some money because he's afraid that J is going to give it all to K.
Right, so this is what the discussion is about.
Yeah.
It turns out this does not happen in equilibrium here, okay? Maybe it would be interesting to look at this, you know, forward-looking Nash equilibria to see whether this would change things.
But you could also change the...
You could try to condition your
You
gift.
could change the utility function.
But like you have recursive translation, right? So it's sort of centrality measuring theory.
No, it would be recursive if we had a Vj here, and I can talk about this. But this is if you have a Vj here, like if altruism is pure, then you first have to solve for the V's. The V's solve this recursive fixed point formulation. And when you solve for the V's as a function of the U's, you're back to a model like this. We have results on this case in the paper, but I didn't want to enter. So it's a if you want, pure altruism is a specific case of this model. Okay. Yeah.
You mentioned briefly about efficiency, so what is the notion of efficiency here?
Yeah. So we will not talk. We don't really have results on efficiency. Well, we know that, you know, most equilibria are not Pareto optima. There are all sorts of externalities here. So there is no reason why, you know. We know that there is one case where an equilibrium is a Pareto optimum. It's when only one agent has all the resources, is richer than all the others, and he gives to everyone else, and he cares about everyone else. Then if you want, the equilibrium, it just corresponds to the maximization of his altruistic utility, and it's, you know, a Pareto optimum. Otherwise, you know, there may be results to get here. We worked on this a bit. We have some partial results. They didn't make it in the current version. 21 pages on the paper.
I guess my question is easier, so I just don't know whether when you analyze the efficiency, you use the true utility function ui of yi for agent I, or you use vi for agent I.
Right.
So what's
Here you would want to use vi.
okay.
And it turns out that, you know, the Pareto optima for the V's it's a subset of the Pareto optimas for the U's. Okay. So altruism, in a way, restricts the Pareto frontier. It does not really change it. Altruism in this form. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So what are the Nash conditions in this model? Altruistic utility is concave in, on transfers. So Nash conditions are simply, the first order conditions of on altruistic utility maximization. For every pair of agents in equilibrium, my marginal utility of consumption is lower than or equal to the discounted altruistic marginal utility. And if I give, they have to be exactly equal, right? Have to be exactly equal. Right? So the derivative of the altruistic utility with respect to Tij is minus ui prime plus alpha ij uj prime. Yeah.
So that's my point on the floor, which is if you know that you will give the money to another guy, you wouldn't want to, then on equilibrium you won't have this problem.
So, give me one way to formalize this, and I'm happy to work with it. Here I'm working with the Nash equilibrium of this game, and somehow, it doesn't happen. So there are externalities. You're not happy that, some of this money is leaking away, but in equilibrium, it's happening. Okay. But if you want to do a version of this with, this forward-looking,
So are you giving more money than what would ensure that level of consumption so that then you can spend some of them on?
Sure, this is exactly what is going to happen, right? Because, so let me show you the kind of thing that is going on. So, relatively simple Nash conditions. For instance, under Cara, we get that, the difference in consumption levels between two agents is always bounded. So if I is not altruistic towards J, this is infinity, it's not a constraint, but if alpha ij is positive, it cannot be greater than some level given by the altruistic coefficient. And the more altruism, the smaller the level. And if you give, there is this precise relation between the two consumption levels. Okay? So here is, one example of what is going on here. Cara utilities, parameters such that the difference cannot be greater than 1 in equilibrium. This is the initial starting point, so example of, say, of a negative shock here. So if you just do one round of best reply, what happens, this guy here who cares about, and who is the only one to care, will give him, actually here it's 4.5. So he will end up at 4.5, 5.5, okay. But of course, this is not an equilibrium because now he has given so much, his own situation is deteriorated, and his friend here who cares about him starts to, give him support. So this is, intermediation kicking in, right? And it turns out that there is only one Nash equilibrium here, which is this profile, okay? And you see, so you have this chain of transfers with 3 links. You see that people further and further away from the individual receiving the shock, have higher and higher consumption. And if we had a 5th guy here, he would not give anything, okay? So we call these agents transfer intermediaries. They receive some money and they give some money, okay? And this could not happen, this does not happen in a complete graph. You don't have transfer intermediaries in a complete graph. You need holes in the network. So here is a technical result that is useful to analyze the game. So the game turns out to have a best response potential, for those of you who are familiar with the notion. So a transfer network is a Nash equilibrium if and only if, so it's a reformulation if you want, result. It maximizes this function, which turns out to be concave, over, the space L here is the number of links in the altruistic networks, meaning the number of pairs where I cares about J, so the coefficient is not 0. Okay, I could discuss this more, but so technically this is interesting because it reduces, this high-dimensional fixed point problem of finding a Nash equilibrium to, it's still high-dimensional, but now we have to maximize the concave function over, a simple space. So mathematically, we're in a much easier world to deal with. The other thing which is interesting here is that what you can see from this part is that it turns out that in equilibrium, any transfer profile will minimize the cost of reaching the final consumption level from the initial income levels. Cost in the sense that, you know, where if you want, you can interpret a transfer from I to J as being costly and with a cost of minus the log of the coefficient. So it's a virtual cost. And it turns out that this, you know, this problem of minimizing the cost of transfers, it's something which is known in computer science or you know, operations research. It's known as minimum cost flow. It's a very classical problem of optimal transportation network. It's a bit different from the max flow min cut theorem and techniques, but it's, you know, so, and this can be used, you know, for algorithms to find the equilibrium. And
Have you done this with CRR? I know you picked on the CAR case.
so this is true for any utility function. I use the Cara for the examples,
Oh, I see.
but this result is valid, you know, for any increasing and concave, even heterogeneous utility.
It seems that if the network has circles, then there might not be a unique equilibrium because if you can add a constant transfer along the
So, yes and no. So what you're describing will not happen in equilibrium. Even if the altruistic network is a circle, you will not have circles in transfers. However, we can get multiple equilibria, but it's non-generic. So
So why is it that if you add a constant transfer on the circle, why is that not going to be an equilibrium of the? It seems that the.
well, you're changing the consumption level. This just, you know, cannot happen. What the main reason is that because of the assumption we made that, you know, when you make a transfer, it has to be from a richer to a poorer. So the consumption level decreases along transfer path in equilibrium. Okay, so you cannot circle back. Okay,
A convex set of transfers, right? A convex set of equilibria. So
this can happen non-generically. Yeah,
does allow that. But
yeah, sure.
You can't,
So
you can't have two isolated equilibria.
you can,
You can't have two isolated equilibria.
yeah, precisely. So you're getting technical here, but you're exactly right. There was another, no, yeah. Yeah, so technically it's called the best response potential, which is why it took us a while to find it. It's not an exact potential, it's not a weighted potential. You have to reformulate the conditions. Here you have to take the logs of the Nash conditions and then you find it. So what do we get from this reformulation? First, a Nash equilibrium exists. Equilibrium transfers are acyclic, right? So this was a discussion. You never get cycles in transfers. Moreover, they flow through the strongest path of the altruistic network. So there is this, you know, geometric relation between the transfer network and the altruistic network. What is the strongest path here? It's related to the shortest path idea, where here we measure the strength of a path as the product. There was a small discussion on this in Benstock. The product of the altruistic coefficient. Okay, so each path has a strength, and the one with the, you know, highest strength is the one. So if you see transfers in data, you know, and this model explains the data, but you don't have information on altruism, you do know that the path you observe is a path of highest strength. Okay. Equilibrium consumption is unique. This is a useful result, always. Okay, it comes from the concavity of the potential is concave in T, but strictly concave in Y. Moreover, second order stochastically dominates Y0, meaning that there is always less inequality in consumption than in income. Maybe, you know, it's an obvious result, but these informal transfers do decrease inequality overall. But there are not obvious results that are coming, so. And generically in alpha, the equilibrium is unique in transfers, and it has a forest structure. So, however, non-generically, and that was the case of the complete graph analyzed by Professor Haro, you can have multiplicity and even a high multiplicity, but then the set of equilibria is always convex. It's a very specific structure. So this is if you want the technical part on existence, uniqueness, and what are the economic implications of this model? And to get at this, we study comparative statics, and in particular, how changes in incomes and in the network affect, transfers and consumption. So first, we show that we have this monotonicity result if one agent gains in income. So you compare two income profiles where one, has more. Everyone's consumption increases weekly. Some don't change, some, okay. So the whole society moves in the same direction, okay. Even though for transfers, the picture is much more complicated. You have a mix of substitutes and complements in the game. Some transfers increase, some decrease. But at the end of the day, on consumption, the proof is quite subtle. Cannot give the intuition, but it works. It's consistent with this, paper showing that, public programs benefit, socially connected households. Now, this was, a shock on one agent. What happens, for instance, now if we redistribute income in society? So let me first show you two examples. This is the original income distribution, and with Cara utilities, such that the difference in consumption levels in equilibrium cannot be greater than 2. This is a Nash equilibrium. The rich center gives to the poor right, and that's it. Okay? And here I show you two examples of ex-ante income redistribution. So say, public, intervention that takes some income to some agent, redistributed to some other agent, presumably from, Actually, both of these redistributions are from richer to poorer. So both of these redistributions decrease income inequality ex ante. Okay? Here is a simple one. You take ex ante, 2 from the rich center, you give it to the poor right. What happens is that here we have perfect crowding out. The center decreases its private transfers precisely by the amount that was given, redistributed by the government. Okay? And so this is a situation which is called neutral because, the public intervention at the end of the day has no impact on consumption. Okay? Because of this adjustment in private transfers. And there is a literature on this kind of phenomenon. What may be a bit more interesting is what's going on here. Now, suppose that you take 2 from the center, you give it to left. You're still decreasing income inequality, right? Because you're taking from a rich, giving to a relatively poorer. Here is a new Nash equilibrium. So now, center has less money, so it can give less to, its poor friend. And if you look in terms of consumption distribution, 644, 653 is a mean preserving spread from 644. Okay, so inequality increases here in terms of second order stochastic dominance. So all the indices you want to, Gini, everything just increases. So to repeat, decreasing income inequality can increase consumption inequality. So you have to be very careful about interventions, It's not just a crowding out kind of issue. It can have, this perverse effect. So we have a result where we characterize the impact of small changes in the whole income profile. And we find that this impact crucially depends on the weak components of the network of transfers, which is an endogenous object, So start from an income level. You have some equilibrium, okay? Transfers between agents, which define weak components. What do I call by weak? On directed networks, you have 2 kinds of components. The strong components that Ben was mentioning, and weak components you can define this way. Forget about the direction of the transfers and just look at the components of what you get. Okay. So in equilibrium, everything happens as if agents pooled incomes within components. So it looks a bit like a, efficiency kind of property, but it's an equilibrium phenomenon. Technically, what is the result? It's a generic result, so generically in alpha and in the income profile. Y I tilde, so the consumption level when the income profile is y tilde 0, is some function of the aggregate income in the component of I in the original network of transfer. Okay? So it's as if agents pool their income all together in the component and then redistribute it through some sharing rule. Okay. So to show this, what we do is that we show that generically, if you want, so you have this network of transfers, and who gives to whom? If you forget how much they give, but who gives to whom, this does not change if you change incomes a little bit, right? Generically. So if you move incomes a little bit, the graph of transfers, the binary graph of who gives to whom, is unchanged. And this graph, defines from the Nash conditions, a set of equations connecting, all the consumption levels. And we can get this. It's relatively easy to show. So genericity is a bit technical, but in particular, what this means is that any small redistribution within components is neutral. And actually, it's a characterization. It's an if and only if. It's a generic, but the redistribution is neutral if and only if it stays within components. Okay? So we can get back now to the Bernay and Bagwell paper. So essentially, they showed in a different model, but related, that any redistribution is neutral if the network of transfers is connected, meaning that it has only one component. Okay. So when it's not connected, it's neutral when it stays within component. And then we have, perfect crowding out. However, when you have redistributions between components, it's not neutral. And essentially, an individual gains in consumption when the aggregate income in his component increases, okay? And he loses when the aggregate income decreases. So what really matters is what's going on at the component level. So in the, I think now, supplementary appendix of the paper, we have some results on, when these perverse effects are going on. And it's not just a curiosity. I mean, essentially, this happens when you remove resources from, social benefactors, and somehow you mistarget the recipients, right? So you have rich people in poor communities, and somehow, the money you take from them that are altruistic and, giving support is not going to these poor agents.
So you note that things can go wrong if you're not careful, but if you are careful, presumably you can, through public intervention, you can improve.
Of course. So, of course, decrease in income inequality can also decrease consumption inequality. In particular, we know that one problem with these informal schemes is that, some people are socially excluded, right? They don't have access to this, informal safety nets. And presumably, public programs are better, although, it's also a problem for public programs, but they are presumably better at targeting, the very poor. So, of course, you're right, I mean. But, as often in theoretical work, we like to understand your counterintuitive phenomenon. Another counterintuitive phenomenon is that the other question we look at is, how does consumption change when, altruism expands? So, for instance, you add more altruistic links into society, okay? So it turns out another, a priori weird and ex post trivial as usual, that more links can also lead to an increase in inequality. So more altruism in society can increase inequality in consumption, okay? Why is this the case? So here is an example. It's a bit more complicated to get numerical values that work out. So I think it's probably a second order phenomenon. But So here is an example. Again, Cara utility functions with maximal possible distance in consumption levels of 3. This is the original society, 2 lines disconnected, and, rich, middle income, poor. So in the original equilibrium, you have this intermediation, right? The rich gives support to, his middle income friend, and some of this money leaks away through the poor, Now, suppose you connect the rich on the left with the poor on the right. Okay? Here is a new equilibrium, and what you can see. So, first observation is that for the pair itself with the new link, inequality decreases, of course. So now, there is some transfer flowing through the new link, and, we are going from 1914 to 1815. So within the pair, inequality has dropped. Okay? Transfers going on, However, this has, because of the externalities and the strategic interactions, this has impacts on, the broader society, right? And what is going on here, what you can see is that the consumption levels of all the agents on the left drops, while the consumption levels of all the agents on the right increases. Okay? And this makes sense because this, social benefactor, he has, a new friend or, cousin to give support to. So he has less money, there is substitution effect, less money to give, to his former, to his friends. So, informal support is not as good. And, conversely, informal support, now these guys have, because of this new source of support, they may give less, right? And we show, and what you can check, so we cooked up the numbers so that this consumption distribution is also more unequal than this one for second order stochastic dominance. Okay, so it's a very strong, if you want, increase in inequality, or at least strong in the sense that it's robust to the index with which you will measure inequality. And we show in the paper that it's a general phenomenon. The indirect neighbors of the giver lose, the indirect neighbors in the transfer network win, and then it depends on how who wins and who loses and how much. Okay, I'll skip this. So let's step back a bit and get back to. So this is one model of informal transversal networks. Get back to the question of is it altruism or exchange that we see in the real world, or I will not really get there, but what are the different properties of these different models, okay, that could potentially be used to identify the different motives in the data. So one remark is that with altruism, small shocks typically do not elicit transfers, and on the opposite, large shocks, the larger the shocks, the more transfers. So on the effect of shock size, it's kind of the opposite of what's going on in the social collateral approach. Small shocks, are not insured if you want, but large shocks, when it's altruism, large shocks are well insured. So this could be one idea. I mean, I started to talk with applied economists on this. I think this can be brought to data. In altruism, more generally, transfers can always flow in the same direction, right? If you have a rich, again, benefactor. Obviously, this cannot happen under exchange. We can have redistribution in terms of expected income, but you cannot have under exchange that, it's always the same people who give. It has to go both, in some state of the world, it has to go in the other way. Otherwise, it's not exchanging. Okay. So this is another, potential idea to try to identify these motives. There is a lot of interesting empirical work going on right now on social pressure, okay, which is presumably very important in the real world and in developing countries, sometimes called the kin tax. So apparently, especially in Africa, it seems problematic. So one way to be sure that it's pressure and not exchange or altruism or whatever is when you run experiments and you leave the option to people to pay to hide the income they get from the experiment. They take the option. They're ready to pay, you know, for other people to not know that they have some money. Okay. If you're altruistic, what would you care, right, about the fact that the others know how much you have? Okay. There is some indirect evidence as well, but quite convincing. Recent paper, for instance, by Jean-Marie Balland on Cameroon, where he finds, and he was not studying pressure a priori, he was studying credit, and on some credit cooperatives, they realized in their study that 20% of the loans taken by individuals were taken in situations where these individuals had a saving account with more money than the loans they took. And these loans are costly, okay? Formal lending is not very well developed. So they're ready to pay, you know, to take a loan and that, you know, they have the money. So apparently it's economically irrational, right? And when they ask people, you know, why do you take the loan if you don't need it? Apparently one of the main reasons is that to have a loan gives you a good pretext not to have to give money to your cousins when they come to see you, and, you know, because I have this loan to pay, sorry. So, you know. And finally, there is this very interesting, you know, paper by Alger and Weibel, where, you know, on moral hazard and incentives, there are interesting things going on that, you know, and altruism and pressure may have opposite effects. So we talked about this already, but I think this is an interesting phenomenon. There is a lot of evidence that this skin tax, you know, has a depressing impact on you know, investment and savings, and it probably has a relatively large negative economic, you know, consequence. All this social pressure. Okay. So I have 5 minutes, right? Just a brief word. These models of, you know, frictions with informal transfers networks, it's actually quite an active area of research. And there are some ideas to explore still. So first, transfers could actually be costly. You know, that would be a natural way to model friction. So for instance, if you send money, you know, abroad, it is actually costly. You pay, you know, a fee. So for instance, it could be proportional to the transfer you make. So it's money lost for you and for the giver and for the receiver. So here is a natural model that has not been studied, if, you know, some among you are interested, that could potentially be interesting. Just saying that, you know, somehow there is this transaction cost. So when you give TIJ, the receiver receives, you know, a proportion of what you give, and from the transfers you receive is the same. You only receive a proportion of what is given. How would this affect, you know? And presumably, so this CIJ, this would be the network aspect. It could be in this cost, right? So maybe it's less costly to make transfers to your wife than to someone far away. It could be.
Yeah, income inequality. If the mediator takes most of the money, which happens with people going to support their families, and the intermediator will take a big proportion of the transfer of money, then it can increase the income inequality.
Okay, so you're saying it can increase income inequality?
If you
Sure.
want to give
What's sure is that there is a lot of money here. So we are not in a redistribution world anymore, you know. So the sum of the consumption is not equal to the sum of the income. There is a net loss from the point of view of the community, and, you know, so who knows what might happen. So I don't know. This model has not been studied. So, and it sounds like a natural model. There are some very recent papers, and so.
I could tell you I have a paper on transfers, costly transfers.
Aha.
Unfortunately, I forget. The results were very messy, so I can't remember what they are now. I'll try, and it's published at a place even more obscure than the previous one.
So I should definitely look at it.
And I'll try to send me a note and I'll try it
Okay.
somewhere.
Thank you.
And I'll have a copy.
Another natural idea that has been explored into very recent papers, including one by Attila Ambrus and Wayne Gao, who is in the audience, is the idea that, agents may not observe what happens, far away in the network, or for instance, even at distance 2. And this may constrain the kind of transfers that people make to each other. My current understanding of this framework is that by assumption, you don't have intermediation, right? But I guess you could extend this easily to go step 3 in the network, for instance. So then you will have a little bit of intermediation.
You don't have to, if you know the parameters, you don't have to observe the transfers. You can infer them.
I guess you're right. But more generally, there are things to do with informational frictions, I guess, in this kind of context. Okay, and the issue of network endogeneity is, of course, an important issue. There are a bunch of papers on this. If you're interested, come and ask me. Just to conclude, so I think we're at the stage where we're having, two literatures that are growing quite nicely, but that are still not really talking to each other. One is this empirical literature. So I mentioned all the papers by Marcel Fachon and others. But, applied economists in development are collecting more and more data and more precise data on these bilateral transfers. They want to see precisely what is going on, okay? So Pascaline Dupas, for instance, is involved in projects on this, but she's not the only one. So we're kind of getting away from the Townsend view of, just looking at consumption and having this black box test to try to, getting into the black box to see precisely what is going on. It's self-insurance, is it, transfers, how do the transfers work, okay? On the empirical side, we're reaching this stage. On the theoretical side, as hopefully I showed you, we now have some serious, models of informal transfers in networks, potentially with frictions, and there are some models. But we are at the stage where there's very little combination between the two. And when I say very little, it's essentially 0. Or, not 0, 0. So some of the recent papers try to do things, but, and I think, this is where the best, papers will be written, right? Trying to get these models to data. There are many questions that emerge here. First, these tests à la Townsend that have been so popular. Can we develop, counterparts to these tests, depending on the network model we have in mind? Second, I think the key issue is this issue of intermediation, okay? And this can be studied empirically, even forget about the model, right? If I is linked with J, J is linked with K, I is not linked with K, only indirectly, does a shock on K affect I, okay? And by how much and what's going on here, okay? I think, and then, we may be close to the stage where we can do structural estimations with our fancy models and the data. I've been thinking a bit about this, and we'll see whether we do it in the end with the altruism project. But as you've seen, in networks there is some, interesting theory, but in the literature and community, people have been, more and more interested in data, but there is still very little mixing of the two, more generally, not only on risk sharing. And, economists have, have good skills to do structural estimation. So it's hard, though. But